we've talked on this show before about how the anti-democratic forces in our society are very good at manipulating the definitions of words or giving connotations to words or groups that they maybe didn't have before. So, can you tell us who smugglers are, what smuggling is, and maybe more importantly, what it is not?
Sure. Well, I think the most important thing to understand is that smuggling and trafficking are two radically different things. And the problem is that most people, including, I would say, the majority of media and politicians, conflate those two things. Um, Human trafficking is something that is done against somebody's will, right? So, like, you are taken from one place to another, you are sold into slavery, you are moved without, against your free will. People who are smuggled literally pay someone to move them, right, from one place to another. And so you can think about one as smuggling as oftentimes as a service provided to a client, where trafficking is something that is done against somebody's will. It's not to say that you can't pay a smuggler to take you someplace and then they end up trafficking you. That does happen, but they're two very different things. And just even watching this current ramp up around this presidential election, and seeing both parties talk about this desire to crack down on human trafficking across the U.S. Mexico border. It's not actually what they're interested in doing. They're interested in stopping migration that is facilitated by smugglers. Trafficking across the U.S. Mexico border, like through Arizona, through Texas. That's not, I would say, like 90% of the people who come across those borders are being smuggled and not trafficked. So that's a really important distinction, and that was something that in the beginning I really wanted both to understand myself, but also I really wanted the general public to understand that, because we talk about undocumented migration, we talk about border security, we talk about migrants all the time, and yet we never talk about smugglers, despite the fact that you can't have any of these processes occurring without those individuals involved in this thing. And so people should think about smuggling as literally a service that migrants actively seek out, pay for, review, make recommendations, based on good smugglers, bad smugglers. But it's really part of this much larger system of clandestine migration I think it's one of the least understood elements of it.
Yeah, and in fact, it's quite big business, as you just alluded to, and you also write about the migrant industrial complex, and in some ways, the smugglers and the border patrol folks kind of need each other to make the whole thing work. Can you tell us more about how that whole system operates?
I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year spent on smuggling people across international borders. And it's incredibly big business. It's growing in both its complexity and in its scale, and the amount of money that's being. It used to be like, when we talk about undocumented migration in the Western Hemisphere, really the discussion was about the U.S. Mexico border, and we know now that getting across the U.S. Mexico border, for most people, that's one of several borders that they have to cross. So we can imagine people coming from Haiti or coming from Africa, who fly into Brazil, into Venezuela, and then work their way, oftentimes walking across numerous borders to get to the U.S. Mexico. And each one of those borders that they have to cross, each one of those countries they have to cross, they are shelling out money to smugglers, and different entities who are looking to tax at. And I think as the world gets more and more unlivable, and people have to flee their home countries and make these long journeys, you're going to see more people, trying to capitalize on that process. And it used to be, when I began working on this subject almost 20 years ago, you could get across the U.S. Mexico border for a couple $1,000s, and now you can't cross the U.S. Mexico border probably for less than, I would say, $6,000 or $7,000, $8,000, and that's just that border. So people, the bulk of the folks that I worked with for this project were coming from Honduras, who can pay upwards of $10,000 just to get across Mexico, and then have to pay additional funds to get across the U.S. Mexico border. And just keep in mind too that, like, as migration has ramped up, as more countries are becoming more and more unlivable. People are experiencing the impacts of climate change and famine and growing, poverty and political corruption. As they're having to cross more and more borders, you have all of these criminal organizations who now see these things as very easily taxed. And so, as migration has picked up, so has the way in which criminals are trying to charge money to people at different parts of the journey.
So how did the people you talked to find their way into this work?
Most of the people I worked with they're all failed migrants. They're all trying to get to the United States. They're all trying to leave poverty, leave violence behind. Some of them are involved in this violence in their home country, and they want to flee that. And um, and they fail. They try to get to the U.S. They don't have a good support network in the states, and so they can't really make a go of it, or they can't get across. But they find that as criminal organizations, as gangs like MS-13 and drug cartels have gotten more interested in human smuggling, these guys, these smugglers who come oftentimes from this long or short lives, but ones that are dominated by violence and risk, but they understand how to navigate it. They see that they actually have these job skills that allow them to to do this kind of work. And so right now, if you want to cross the U.S.-Mexico border, or if you want to cross Mexico, which has become increasingly difficult because of extortion, because of cartels, because of ramped up immigration enforcement, you need a smuggler who is a rough and tumble kind of character, who is willing to be violent to protect their clients, who understands kind of how to negotiate with violent entities and individuals. And so these like street kids coming out of gangs, fleeing gangs in Honduras, find that they can actually make some money with those same skills in Mexico. And I think nobody chooses this lifestyle. It's incredibly violent, difficult, brutal. Most of the guys that I work with, they don't last long in this because they either die, they go to prison, or if they are the lucky minority, they're able to escape and find something else. But it's quick money. It's not a lot of money, but it is quick money for some of these guys. And I would say too, for some of the folks that I write about, they're involved in a lot of other kind of nefarious, violent sorts of things out on the streets that's outside of the world of smuggling. And a lot of them actually see the work of smuggling as a form of redemption in some way, that they like, okay, I'm no longer being violent over here. I'm doing stuff over here, but I'm doing it as a way to help these people and to provide a service and to kind of get them where they need to go. But it's a pretty miserable, I think, lifestyle that's full of a lot of lows. There is obviously a lot of drug and alcohol abuse, and it's a wild ride. And I think some of these young people that I work with get attracted to that because it's just part of this kind of lifestyle, but also with the recognition that ride can't last forever.